After the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021 that led to Kabul falling to the Taliban, the Biden administration carried out a haphazard evacuation and parole of more than 70,000 Afghan nationals into the United States. And we'll talk more about the importance of parole and its unique meaning within the immigration laws. But many of the 70,000 Afghan nationals that were paroled in the United States were unvetted and allowed to travel throughout the United States even when we had derogatory information or concerns about them. On November the 26th, we'll remember that one of these Afghan nationals, a man named Ramanullah, I'm going to butcher his name, Kanwal, carried out an ambush-style shooting against our National Guard service members here in the nation's capital. One of them was killed, Sarah Beckstrom. This tragic incident first lays bare the obvious question: how did this murderer come to be let in the United States in the first place? And secondly, how do we know that there are no other such Afghan nationals in the United States who might carry out another similar attack? To answer these questions, let's take a brief walk back in history to the 9/11 World Trade Center attacks in 2001. In 2004, the 9/11 Commission issued its final report noting that America remains at risk due to gaps in our nation's overall security apparatus, especially with regard to the vetting of foreign nationals, as well as information sharing and communications amongst the top law enforcement agencies and the intel community. Since 2001, many improvements have been made, but America remains at risk. During his first administration, President Trump heeded the recommendations of the 9/11 Commission and imposed enhanced vetting requirements on aliens seeking to enter the United States. But enhanced vetting for aliens and increased coordination between government entities to assess an individual's risk to the United States yields little results if a subsequent president and administration deliberately choose to ignore these effective measures. President Biden made this choice the moment he took office in 2021. He revoked each and every one of President Trump's executive orders and proclamations requiring enhanced vetting of aliens. Similarly, President Biden revoked an assessment of the security apparatuses of countries around the globe who had nationals seeking to enter the United States. But the bigger blunder came in April of 2021 when President Biden charged ahead with the announcement that the United States would withdraw from Afghanistan by 9/11/2021. During his first administration, President Trump created a strategy for an effective drawdown in Afghanistan based on input from military leaders on the ground. President Biden chose to ignore that strategy, presumably to land another rebuke of President Trump's policies or to make a political point. Whether President Biden rushed forward with full knowledge and deliberation or was wholly unaware of what was orchestrated by his staff under him is a question best left for another day and another hearing. But one thing's clear: responsibility for the failures with the withdrawal and evacuation from Afghanistan lies squarely at the feet of the Biden administration. Not one of the agencies during his tenure in office were prepared for the speed with which Kabul fell, nor were they ready for the volume of Afghans who had rushed to the embassy and airport seeking to leave Afghanistan. Neither the Biden State Department, the Department of Defense, nor the Department of Homeland Security had a proper plan in place. They didn't have enough information on the number of people who needed to be evacuated, let alone who most of these people were, especially if they were not directly associated with the embassy. There was no real guidance, policies, or procedures in place, and as noted in one report, the agencies essentially made up policies and procedures on the fly, essentially on an ad hoc basis. One deputy inspector general stated informally, that he believed the bombing at Abbey Gate on August 26, 2021, which killed 13 service members, was a direct result of the lack of coordination and failure to have the right information about the anticipated volume of people who would be coming or who would be considered vulnerable and in need of evacuation. Let me say that again. A Deputy Inspector General said the bombing at Abbey Gate on August the 26th, 2021, which killed 13 American service members, was a direct result of the failures of the Biden administration. The airlift from Afghanistan was the largest in U.S. history. The DoD, Department of Defense, moved more than 120 Afghan nationals out of Afghanistan in 17 days. Once these nationals were taken to transit sites outside of Afghanistan, known as lily pads in Qatar, Bahrain, UAE, Kuwait, Italy, and Germany, the department generally only had between 10 to 14 days to transport them from those countries to the United States. The speed and lack of coordination of the withdrawal was far from the only problem. The process by which massive numbers of these foreign nationals was vetted and brought to the United States was also filled with flaws. Let me turn to Operation Allies Welcome. The young man who committed this heinous attack against our National Guard service members on November the 26th was not the recipient of a congressionally passed special immigrant visa program. Rather, he entered the country through Operation Allies Welcome parole program. You heard me use that term before, and I'll use it again. Under this parole program that was created, or this parole program was created as an end run around Congress. And the Biden administration in the process let in tens of thousands of unvetted Afghans into the country. These individuals had no honorable military service or sacrifice that warranted special treatment. In fact, most of them had no immigration status at all, which is why they were admitted under this authority known as parole. Now, when we talk about parole, it's not what most of us think about in the criminal law context. It's where folks are, under U.S. immigration law, parole is somewhat like an easy pass, like speeding through a toll booth. If we consider the definition of the word, it becomes clear just how foolish the Biden administration's actions were. The U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service defines the word parole as a discretionary decision to allow inadmissible aliens who are not admitted to the United States to be physically present in the United States. Or to put it more succinctly, parole is a form of entry specifically for people who might otherwise be inadmissible. We can put these definitions together in this chart. In other words, parole authorizes the Department of Homeland Security Secretary to allow people in our country who otherwise would not be allowed in. This discretionary immigration authority was only supposed to be used on a case-by-case basis for exceedingly rare and extreme circumstances. Under Operation Allies Welcome, President Biden essentially gave an easy pass to hundreds of thousands of aliens who otherwise were not eligible to come, or who were not eligible to come, but for this discretionary issuance of parole. The Biden administration used parole to allow aliens into the country who were virtually unknown, except for the information they provided to us about themselves. One thing that struck me after I received several briefings on this parole program was how the security vetting process was often based on information that was not accurate, and in many cases was either incomplete, missing, or completely fabricated. In other situations, agencies relied on records that were inaccurate, incomplete, or missing critical biographic data like the person's name or date of birth. One State Department Inspector General audit highlighted a Kabul embassy official's comment about the high level of fraud in Afghanistan as compared to other countries. Remember that Afghanistan has been run by a terrorist organization for multiple periods of time throughout its history. Given this fact and given that this government controls many of the records from that country, can we ever truly rely on any document issued by Afghanistan to confirm that any Afghan national is who they claim to be? Even more disturbing were the findings from the Department of Homeland Security Inspector General that some Afghan parolees made it into the United States even though they had not actually completed their vetting protocols. At least 1,300 Afghan nationals were allowed to travel and enter the United States before we even collected their biometrics, fingerprints, photograph, in order to run background checks through the various government databases. At the end of the day, the Biden administration allowed more than 70,000 Afghan nationals into the United States using this claimed parole authority. And once these folks were here, the agencies simply lost track of them. To date, we still haven't located many of the Afghan parolees who were resettled into over the 176 communities across the United States. But thankfully, now that President Trump is back in office, he's prioritized vetting of all aliens outside the country and currently inside the country, including parolees. According to the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, and the National Counterterrorism Center Director Kent, more than 70,000 Afghan parolees President Biden allowed into the country through Operation Allies Welcome, 18,000 of them were known or suspected terrorists. The NCTC has identified 2,000 individuals with ties to terrorist organizations and is actively working with the FBI on their cases. So clearly, more needs to be done. We need to codify, that is, put into law, the policies and procedures that we know are needed to ensure that America has an effective security apparatus and vetting process outside and inside the United States. Until that happens, we can't give the American public a 100% guarantee, which they're entitled to, that another attack will not occur. Americans deserve to live free from fear that individuals with ties to terrorist organizations are not roaming about our country. We cannot bring back U.S. Army Specialist Sarah Beckstrom, but we can and will do everything in our power to prevent such a horrible incident from occurring again. That accountability starts today with this hearing.